In a time of broken relationships and nuclear weapons, the possibility of war looms on the horizon. The lack of communication between the Soviet Union and America creates an atmosphere of mistrust spanning through multiple decades.
Yet this barrier did not prevent a 10-year-old girl from advocating for a peaceful future without war.
With just a handwritten letter to Yuri Andropov, leader of the Soviet Union, Samantha Smith not only broke barriers between the world's two leading superpowers during the Cold War, but also proved that age does not limit one's ability to make a difference.
Many people will remember the young lady who joins us now this morning. She is 11-year-old Samantha Smith. She made headlines last year when she went to the Soviet Union at the invitation of the late President Yuri Andropov.
The Cold War started immediately after World War II as tensions between the Soviet Union and America grew regarding political ideology and the usage of nuclear weaponry. From the late 1960s to the late 1970s, Secretary of State Henry Kissinger practiced the iconic Cold War policy of détente.
By maintaining peace with Russia and China, the policy yielded numerous treaties. Some were huge successes, others failed to uphold diplomatic relationships between the countries. An example is the Limited Test Ban Treaty signed in 1963 due to the Cuban Missile Crisis.
The treaty ended nuclear bomb testing in underwater and atmosphere, making it the world's first nuclear arms control pact. Another attempt at resolution included the Non-Proliferation Treaty of 1968, but unfortunately this did not prevent the increase of nuclear weapons. However, it did help pave the way for the Strategic Arms Limitation Talks, otherwise known as the SALT I.
Unfortunately, this period of treaties and negotiations drew to a close with the end of the 1970s as détente began to fade.
Progress of nuclear arms stalled and the relationship between both countries worsened. It was during this period of re-emerging conflicts that a young girl was able to voice her opinion on this issue.
Samantha Smith was born in Holton, Maine on June 29, 1972. Despite being only 10 years old at the time, she had already heard of the devastating implications of the Cold War at school and through listening to news channels. The Cold War truly affected everyone, no matter their age or nationality.
We were all afraid of back then, especially during the Cold War, which is why she wrote that letter. I mean, because we used to hear stuff like that all the time, and they were testing a lot of the bombs.
During the 1980s, there was increasing tension that existed between America and the Soviet Union under the U.S. President Ronald Reagan and Soviet's new leader, Yuri Andropov. The nuclear arms race had the potential to escalate into another catastrophic world war. In order to address her concerns with America's current environment, Samantha wrote the following letter to Yuri Andropov.
She wanted me to write a letter, and I just, without thinking, said, well, why don't you write a letter? And I went off to do my thing, and next thing I know, she's got this letter for me.
Within just a few months, a Soviet Union newspaper known as Pravda published excerpts of her letter in April 1983. Her letter gained recognition, yet Samantha Smith had not received a reply. Samantha wrote a second letter to the Soviet ambassador Anatoly Dobrinin to find out why Yuri Andropov hadn't replied to her yet.
It took about half a year to get the letter back from him, but he finally did write back to me. And he told me that I reminded him of Becky in the book Tom Sawyer. He told me how they were really concerned about peace, too, and friendship, and he said that they would never be the first ones to use the nuclear weapon.
Andropov concluded by inviting Samantha to visit the country, which she accepted.
Through persistence and initiative, not only was Samantha able to receive a response from the Soviet Union's leader, but his formal invitation was an indication of the country's willingness to welcome Western people and ideas.
I idolized her. She was the big sister that I didn't have. So people were, have continued to ask me whether she was precocious, whether she seemed, ahead of her time. And she really didn't. She was just so down to earth. She just happened to be extremely bright.
On July 7th, 1983, Samantha and her parents, Jane and Arthur Smith, left for their journey to the Soviet Union.
Americans were had been so propagandized that they were extremely suspicious of anybody trying to make peace or make friends with a supposed enemy.
Nonetheless, her message touched the hearts of many people from both nations. Samantha visited numerous attractions and was even taken inside the Kremlin wall to Lenin's study, which was the first time American media was even allowed inside the historical site.
Samantha and her parents arrived at an elite children's camp located on the Black Sea. In honor of her visit, the campers wrote letters advocating for peace addressed to the leaders of America, the Soviet Union, France, and Great Britain. Following her visit to Camp Artek, a new term, children's diplomacy, was coined.
I think what Samantha showed us is that, no, there's value in connecting with people on a personal level. There's value in being true to yourself. Everyone was deeply moved and their lives forever changed by knowing her.
With her father's guidance, Samantha wrote a book known as Journey to the Soviet Union in 1985, and also gave a speech at the International Children's Symposium in Kobe, Japan.
Samantha's emerging fame and national influence paved the way for her to also appear in several televised interviews, including a television special in February 1984 where she interviewed political leaders about issues regarding the campaign. She also made guest appearances on numerous television series, such as Charles in Charge and Lime Street.
Unfortunately, Samantha passed away at the young age of 13. She was killed in a plane crash along with her father while returning to Maine after filming a short segment for Lime Street in London. Her death was a horrible tragedy, and for the first time, both countries were united in sharing the loss.
In order to commemorate Samantha's work, the Soviet Union named a diamond an asteroid and issued a postage stamp in her honor. Maine created a life-size statue of Samantha Smith that included both a dove and a small bear sitting at her feet, symbolizing both Maine and the Soviet Union.
Maine also made the first Monday in June Samantha Smith Day. Despite being gone, Samantha's words and influence continued to impact citizens of both countries. Her mother, Jane Goshorn Smith, started the Samantha Smith Foundation in order to foster international friendships between children and advocate peace education.
The end of the Cold War was a gradual one. Succeeding Yuri Andropov, Mikhail Gorbachev assumed power in the Soviet Union in 1985. He introduced the policies of glasnost and perestroika to the USSR, which advocated for an openness and acceptance of Western goods and ideas. Leaders of the Soviet Union and the United States held a summit conference. The meeting in Geneva with President Reagan and Gorbachev included long personal talks. 6 agreements were reached, ranging from cultural and scientific exchanges to environmental issues. Both Reagan and Gorbachev expressed satisfaction with the summit, which ended on November 21st. By the fall of 1989, East and West Germans tore down the Berlin Wall with pickaxes. Demands for freedom soon spread around the Soviet Union. Americans were shocked at this turn of events.
The end of the Cold War posed new challenges and threats, but also opportunities.
Samantha's role in the end of the Cold War was definitely not a direct one. Her contribution lay in the fact that she improved relationships on a more personal level with the people of the Soviet Union, breaking the communication barriers between both nations.
They fell in love with her over in the former Soviet Union, and then when she came back, I definitely think that it had a positive impact on and changed people's perceptions, because she did something that nobody thought an adult could do, let alone a 10-year-old kid.
She wasn't going over there with some political agenda, so that I think the people could open up to her. Person-to-person diplomacy, that's very important.
What made her so unique was the fact that she had no agenda or ulterior motive.
Her innocent, friendly demeanor set a precedent for future peacemaking treaties by diffusing tension through jokes.
Although Samantha died before she could witness the true end of the Cold War, her story is an example of how age is not a barrier in inciting change on a global standpoint.
Samantha's journey to the Soviet Union is one we should all remember, and her legacy continues on through the spirit of international cooperation and peace.